This is the secret nobody tells you about for healthy relationships. And it's very simple. You are not responsible for your partner's mental state. You can care about it. You can be concerned about it. You can support them, but you are not responsible. Everyone is responsible for their own emotions. If you take responsibility for your partner's emotions, you will set yourself up to be in a lot of pain. You will get outside yourself and make them the focus instead of yourself. When someone gets outside themselves, they suffer. Stop suffering. Get your relationship back on track. Let's get on with this already. Hi guys, I'm Coach Max, and this is The Authentic Techie, the channel that helps you become your most authentic self so you can kick ass in your personal life and in your career. What separates the great from the average techie is how well you know yourself, how well you can regulate your nervous system, and how well you can find that happy place that ultimately will bring you peace. As always, let's level up your game. So where did this all come from that you took responsibility for your partner's emotions? Well, it comes from childhood. It becomes from you being enmeshed unhealthily to your parents. When you were young and you grew up with your parents who were dysregulated, to put it mildly, and projected all their unresolved emotional problems onto you, the end result is that you unconsciously identified with them. There was no separation between you and them. So you learned as a way to cope to walk on eggshells and be constantly managing their moods. This means that when they were miserable, everyone in the household was miserable. This could last for days and it was pretty awful, but you learned to cope. You took responsibility for their mental state in order to survive. And trust me, they were happy for you to do so because they themselves were unable to regulate themselves, so it was all hands on deck to try to soothe them. Back then, you didn't have the mental awareness to separate out from yourself. I mean, you were 5, right? You couldn't just say, hey mom, get your shit together, go to a therapist. Instead, you felt terrible, you blamed yourself, and you lived in a frightened, heightened state. Okay, how does this carry over into our everyday relationships as adults? Well, first, we have no clear boundaries, right? Because we were enmeshed with our parents. We now are enmeshed with our partner, and there's no delineation between what's their emotions and what's mine. We are simply one unit. And the church kind of reinforces this, right? We become one person, where in reality we don't. We're always two separate people that we've created a bridge between ourselves, which is called love, and creating a family or whatever it may be. But we're not one person. We're still two distinct individuals, and nobody is responsible for the other person. Why am I taking responsibility for stuff that isn't theirs? And this is a gradual process. I have to work with them for months and months and months and months to start little by little chipping away at this dogmatic belief that they are somehow responsible for the dysregulation in their partner. They are not. They are only responsible for their own triggers. So if my partner gets dysregulated, I get triggered, my responsibility is to figure out what the hell am I being triggered, right? Why am I going back into that emotional flashback? Why do I think I'm responsible for it? And why do I shame and guilt myself, right? Because in early childhood, I would have shamed and guilted myself because my mother was dysregulated. So now as an adult, I have a ton of guilt and shame. And that stuff needs to be processed. You can't suppress it because then you create a conscious split in yourself. And that's what everyone has. They have shame and guilt. They can't process it, so they have a split. And that split in their psyche creates depression and anxiety. But little by little, we start chipping away. We start separating what's theirs and what's mine, and we start moving toward healthiness. So when their day is ruined and you're coaching with me, we ask, what's actually happening here? Are you responsible for the fact that they're having a problem with their boss or they're in a fight with someone else? What is your responsibility from it? Oh, well, I guess not a lot. Okay, so why do you feel bad? We work on that. They feel bad because they're having an emotional flashback. They feel bad because they have this associated guilt with just being themselves, right? They can't be themselves. They have to be enmeshed with someone else and be trapped in all these mind games, right? But as soon as I start breaking them away from it and they start thinking about like what is really happening here, and they have a little bit of awareness, the light of awareness comes in and the healing processes come in. They just have to focus on feeling what is within them rather than doing their compulsive action to rescue their girlfriend or mother. Really, it could be anybody. You shouldn't be rescuing anybody. How could you rescue anyone? Because if you rescue someone, you would have to know what the hell you're supposed to do, right? What is the right answer? But the truth is we don't know what the right answer is, right? They may have to go through a lot of hardships in order to dawn on them to change, that they need to change, right? So if you cut them off from the hardship, if you save them, if you swoop in like Batman and take them away and put them in, you're doing you a disservice and you're doing them a disservice. You don't know what's good for them. All you know is really what's good for yourself, which is following your desires and not getting enmeshed with this crap. But from them, you're not responsible. And that takes a lot of courage to say to yourself, I'm not responsible for this. after you've been doing it for, decades and decades and decades. Now, what happens with my clients that start, the dawn of awareness comes on them and they start realizing, holy shit, this is pretty messed up. What am I doing here? Is that they're going to want to bail out. They're going to want to jump ship. They're going to start giving me these stories about abuse and narcissistic abuse. They're not being abused, by the way. If you were being abused, you need to get the hell out of there, but they're not. But they feel like they've been emotionally abused, and they have been gaslighted, and they have been pulled into this story narrative that's not theirs. And their intuition is going to be to get out. But as a good coach, I don't allow that. As long as they're not over abuse and there's not really abusive, it's just a standard run-of-the-mill relationship, they need to stay in the relationship. Now, I can't force them to. I say, like, as a good coach, I do that, but I just give them suggestions and I keep them there, because the real issue is not their partner. Their partner is just playing out their traumas. Their partner is doing autopilot repetition mode, right? The real problem is themselves. Why am I here? What does this give me? Why is this even a thing? Why didn't I have a healthy, happy, stable relationship 20 years ago? How did it get here? Well, it got here because of your early childhood programming, and it continues on because of your patterns. So you have to really look carefully at your patterns. You have to allow yourself to be triggered. You have to allow yourself to go through the valley of hardship. If you remove the triggering by getting out of the relationship prematurely, you haven't resolved anything in yourself or in them, you're going to be just moving your unconscious patterns to the next relationship. So use your relationship right now. Stay 2 feet into it. Start modeling healthy behavior. Start delineating yourself, putting boundaries up on what you allow others to do to yourself. You don't try to control others. You simply control yourself by saying, I don't allow myself to be put up with or be yelled at. I don't allow myself to do this. You're just putting boundaries on your behavior. And when other people cross your behavior, you simply say, this is not my fight to fight. I'm sorry, this is not going to work for me. But you really don't want to exit prematurely. You want to practice putting boundaries. And everybody that's codependently enmeshed has terrible boundaries because they didn't have boundaries with their mother or their father or whoever was traumatizing them as a child. So this is not something that comes naturally to them. They feel guilt and shame, and then they act out in the rescue role. Okay, that was a lot, but let's get onto the plan of attack for this week. Number 1, you're not the therapist, so please stop trying to be. When you have the insatiable need to rescue, turn inward. Go into your feelings. What am I actually feeling here? Not what am I thinking, not what am I compulsively wanting to do, but what am I actually feeling here? Do I feel sad? Do I feel anger? Do I feel guilt? You want to sit with those feelings and get to know them, because it's those feelings you're running away from by the habitual pattern of rescuing. When you get used to sitting with those uncomfortable feelings, you no longer act out. You no longer need to do anything. You're not seeking validation from them. You're not seeking to fix your parent through them. You're working on yourself. Number 2, if they are triggered and you are triggered, get into your feelings and buy some time. I need to process my feelings. Let's talk in half an hour. Let the nervous systems of you and your partner calm down a little. Take some time. You don't need to resolve everything right away. You don't need to get into these long, hour-long conversations. What a mess. Say, hey, we've talked about it for 15 minutes. I'm triggered, you're triggered. Let's take some time for ourselves. We'll come back in half an hour and keep at this, and we'll have new awareness by then. And in that half an hour that you're away from him, go for a long walk, feel what's in, start describing your emotions. You must get into the emotional space and get out of the intellectual space. The intellectual space, blah, 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 whatever the situation is, whatever the same old argument is, you've done it a million times, and that's all headspace. That nothing's happening. But if you get into your emotional space and you start, oh man, this reminds me of my mother. I remember when she used to shame me, so feel a lot of compassion for my younger self. Wow. If you could actually do that, I can almost feel the feeling, the good energies rolling through that. You're out of the fight. You're out of whatever, thing you're talking about today, the same old, and you're into the deeper wound from your childhood. It's not about them. It's always about yourself and the unprocessed traumas that you have been pushing down. Number 3, be selfish. Put yourself first. You need to heal yourself. So take that time to really inquire. The codependent oftentimes is anything but selfish. They feel selfish, but they're anything but selfish because they're always trying to fix someone else. You could kind of say it's a little bit selfish that they're using someone to kind of recreate their trauma, but that's so unconscious that I can't even blame them for it. But if anything, for my codependents, please be more selfish, take time for yourself, have a lot of self-care. Super important. Number 4, communicate authentically. It's not about trying to change them. It's not about, winning the argument. It's about communicating what is the truth for you. And to do that, you have to speak honestly. When we got in this fight, it reminded me of my mother. It reminds me of when I do this. It reminds me of when I do that. It makes me feel like XYZ. When you are describing your feelings and not expecting anything from them, but just honoring your feelings by verbalizing them, that is a huge, huge step forward. We get stuck trying to change our partners, but it's really not. We have to let go of that fantasy because we can't change them. Dude, they can't even change themselves. It's hard to change yourself. If you're coaching and you're doing group programs and you're working with me, it is hard. So imagine the amount of effort required for someone who's not doing any of that to actually change it. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It takes a lot of effort for yourself to change. With all that huge investment of time for someone else, it's not going to happen. And remember, number 5, to be very, very kind to yourself. It's really grieving and compassion that are going to heal you. Grieving for, once you become aware of everything, for the pain that you've had to suffer, for the sheer neglect that you lived through as a childhood. Grieving is healing, and it's a process that starts rolling as you start feeling these deeper feelings. From grief comes compassion, right? So if I'm really grieving for my child self that had to live through that, I chase that down with a lot of self-compassion. Max, your feelings and emotions are okay with you. I'm so sorry you had to live through it. I delight in you, and I would have been there. I would have defended you. Still kind of chokes me up. That is the compassion that runs through me that cured my traumas. And that is the compassion that will run through you when you start doing this work. Grieving is healing, and compassion for the self is really what sets you free. And that about does it for this episode, guys. I'm so happy you're here. I'm Coach Max. This is the Authentic Techie. Check me out at authentictechie.com and let's start your healing journey. If you're ready to do the work, nothing should stop you, because this is literally the most important thing you could ever do in your life. Everything else pales into comparison to emotional healing. Because once emotional healing comes and you have the love fill your heart and the peace, you won't need anything in the world. You won't need to become a billionaire. You don't need to become a millionaire. You don't need to have anything. You will have stillness and peace, and that is priceless. So till next time, guys, take care.